Hello, my name is Anastasia Vynnychenki. I'm the Regional Manager of IOM's Corporate Responsibility in Eliminating Slavery and Trafficking, or IOM CREST program. Thank you for having me. Today, I'm pleased to present to you the IOM's resource package for employers on ethical recruitment and responsible employment of migrant workers. It is important that we put this resource into context and why we developed it specifically for employers. So, over the next 10 minutes, first, we're going to look at the latest data on modern slavery in 2021. Second, I'd like to share with you about IOM's response through partnerships for solutions. And lastly, I will walk you through the IOM's resource package for employers on ethical recruitment and employment of migrant workers itself. There are almost 28 million people in situation of forced labor on any given day. It is deeply concerning that forced labor has grown in recent years. A simple comparison with the 2016 global estimates indicates an increase of almost 3 million people in forced labor between 2016 and 2021. The increase in the number of people in forced labor was driven entirely by forced labor in the private economy, both in forced commercial sexual exploitation and in forced labor in other sectors. The five sectors accounted for the largest share of forced labor are services, manufacturing, construction, agriculture, and domestic work. No region of the world is spared from forced labor, but Asia and the Pacific is host to more than half of the global total. The initial months of the COVID-19 pandemic were accompanied by widespread reports of forced labor linked to the crisis. Disruptions to income because of the pandemic led to greater indebtedness among workers, and with it, reports of a rise in debt bondage. The crisis also resulted in a deterioration of working conditions for many workers, in some cases leading to forced labor. Yet little is known about how forced labor risks have evolved since the crisis, as strict economy-wide workplace shutdowns were phased out in most countries and the world economy began its recovery. Migrant workers face a higher risk of forced labor than other workers. The forced labor prevalence of migrant workers is more than 3 times higher than that of non-migrant workers. The data makes it clear that when migrant workers are not protected by law or are unable to exercise their rights, migration is irregular or poorly governed, or where the recruitment practices are unfair or unethical, migration can lead to a situation of vulnerability to forced labor. So, why is prevalence of forced labor is disproportionately higher? For migrant workers, the exploitation often begins in their country of origin, with labor recruiters who charge excessive recruitment fees or related costs, provide them with misleading information about the job, or through discriminated job selection process. When at destination, migrant workers are often subject to restricted movement, retention of documents and personal property, illegal wage deductions, and continue facing barriers to accessing justice and remedy. IOM works with a variety of stakeholders towards safe, regular, and orderly migration and inclusive development for the benefit of all. The private sector is an important partner in achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the Global Compact for Migration. Corporate Responsibility in Eliminating Slavery and Trafficking, or CREST, is an initiative implemented by IOM that supports businesses in upholding the human and labor rights of migrant workers in key sectors and migration corridors. Building on the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, IOM through CREST program develops partnerships and projects with businesses to firstly build commitments to end exploitation of migrant workers, to implement human rights standards that address migrant workers' vulnerabilities, and promote collaboration across sectors and all stakeholders for sustainable positive change. Our program seems to accelerate the transformation of recruitment ecosystem and maximize impact through partnerships. Drawn from our extensive global network and field presence, we support and drive the implementation of targeted programs with all relevant stakeholders. With multinational enterprises, we enhance transparency in supply chains. We developed strategies to identify and address risks, build knowledge on migration, support impact assessments and public reporting, and promote sectoral and multi-stakeholder collaboration. With employers, we carry out migrant-centered human and labor rights risk assessments. We help them strengthen policies and management systems, provide employers with practical training and practical tools to support engagement with migrant workers, civil society, recruiters, and multinational enterprises. As a UN agency, we facilitate multi-stakeholder collaboration to establish and support a meaningful dialogue and cooperation, promote experience sharing and lessons learned between civil society, governments, and businesses, and drive sector-wide initiatives to protect and respect migrant workers' rights. As an outcome of this partnership approach, two of IOM's flagship tools I'd like to share with you today. First, with support of the government of Sweden, we developed the Migrant Worker Guidelines for Employers. We developed it as a response to the ask from businesses, especially those employing migrant workers directly, to provide a practical tool they can understand and apply. The second tool is an online course, How to Recruit and Employ Migrant Workers Responsibly. It introduces the changing business environment, tells the story of a migrant worker, and explains the key principles laid out in the Migrant Worker Guidelines. Let's have a look at each tool. The Migrant Worker Guidelines for Employers has been designed to promote an understanding of the labor migration process that is in line with the Global Compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration. There is a strong need for employers to understand the labor migration process, which starts in country of origin and not when the worker is already on site. This was and still remains a gap. What's employers' role and responsibility in the recruitment process to ensure workers are protected? How employers can engage in a meaningful way that also makes business sense? Were the key guiding questions that informed this resource. The guidance builds on principles, but it is process-based. It provides the flow and sequence of concrete steps that employers should take. The guideline has been informed by IOM's extensive experience working with governments, with civil society, directly with migrant workers, and with the private sector, as well as the collection of good practice by employers, labor recruiters, and multinational enterprises. Recognizing the need for collaboration among governments as primary duty bearers, civil society organizations, and the private sector, this guidance highlights the specific role employers play in facilitating the ethical recruitment and employment of migrant workers. The tool is primarily for human resources and personnel engaged with migrant workers. We've really tried to put ourselves in the shoes of HR staff who might need to look into a specific topic or area of the recruitment journey. Being modular and robust, this guidance can serve as a basis to develop new policies or guidelines, or it can be integrated in existing company policies, procedures, and practices. The scope of this guidance is centered around international migrant workers in regular, lower wage, and temporary employment situations who are often at a higher risk of abuse and discrimination. However, the principles described in this document apply to all workers, regardless of their nationality, migration status, or country of employment. The tool is interactive, easy to navigate, and download the tools as separate documents. Part 1, Understanding Migrant Workers and the Labor Migration Process, provides an overview of global migration trends, the labor migration process, and the responsibility of employers to respect the rights of migrant workers and mitigate risks of harm. Part 2, Building a Labor Migration Management System, outlines how employers should address and mitigate the risks that migrant workers face by putting in place a labor migration management systems that is based on 4 components. Firstly, it is about ensuring policy commitment. Second, conducting human rights due diligence. Thirdly, providing access to effective remedy. And lastly, ensuring meaningful engagement with migrant workers. Part 3, Managing the Labor Migration Process, outlines the key human rights principles and practices employers should follow when recruiting and employing migrant workers. The principles follow typical stages of the labor migration process that are covered in Part 1. And lastly, Part 4, my favorite part, is about supporting tools. It really provides all the practical tools such as checklists, the list of risks, guidance notes, and other useful documents to help employers implement the system, principles, and practices to manage the labor migration process. The second tool for businesses I am presenting today is the online course How to Recruit and Employ Migrant Workers Responsibly. This e-course provides businesses, be them suppliers or brands, with an introduction how to recruit, employ, and return migrant workers responsibly, both if they're international or internal. It briefly summarizes the changing business environment and why it is important for business to take additional precautions in relation to the migrant workers they hire. It also provides a case study of migrant worker journey and explains key concepts of responsible management of migrant workers in line with migrant worker guidelines. This e-course has been developed under regional CREST fashion program funded by the Laudes Foundation, and it has been informed by IOM's experience working with the private sector, civil society, and governments in countries such as Bangladesh, India, Cambodia, Thailand, and Myanmar. The course is free and self-paced. Both the Migrant Worker Guidelines and the e-course are currently available in English and will shortly be available in Bahasa Malaysia, Thai, Vietnamese, Mandarin Chinese, Japanese, and Arabic. IOM's resource package for employers will be soon filled with more practical tools and guidance, as it will remain a living document. I invite you to download and use these resources in your practice. Thank you for the opportunity to share these resources with you. Please visit our webpage for more information and practical tools.